What is the Order's position on Masonic ethics and morality, and could you elaborate on this?
Well, it's the same as it is with all forms of Masonry, that our job is to make good people better. So naturally that would include expecting people on the Masonic path to become more morally aware and more ethically conscious. As an order and as a tradition, we advocate the protection of one's personal boundaries through wisdom and the protection and defence of other people's boundaries, of not causing anyone any harm unnecessarily, of protecting the innocent and protecting the environment, and all the things that you would expect a decent human being to uphold. One of the reasons that we avoid religion and politics and certain aspects of social engineering is that this often skews the issue, and it can make all sorts of problems that have unfortunate consequences. What we believe is that when you bring things back to humanism, to the idea of people's inherent sovereignty, the importance of every individual, the importance of an individual's well-being, health, and you take your spirituality from that baseline, spirituality naturally flowers in a better way, and that's basically what we adhere to.
What would you say are an Egyptian Mason's ideal ethics? How should they aspire to live?
For an Egyptian Mason, this world isn't the only world of our concern. We're also concerned about the world of the soul and the spirit, and we conceive it in the idea of worlds because we believe that people can potentially have a much more expanded type of existence, an expanded form of consciousness which can embrace many more things than ordinary consciousness does. This having been said, we believe that an Egyptian Mason takes into account all of the necessary duties that being in possession of a body, soul and spirit determines and dictates. It's not only to take care of your body and to protect the material world as we see it around us, the environment, the people and animals and creatures in it, and the state of the environment, but also to protect the soul, to feed ourselves with things that nourish us and empower us and help others to be empowered, and the spirit, to make sure that our connection to the eternal and the infinite, however it's conceived, is as pure and as unadulterated as possible. And this takes a lot of work. So I would say that an Egyptian Mason's ideal ethic is to live in harmony with the universe in the best possible way. That sounds very hippie and very, slightly flaky, and it could be easily deconstructed in that way, but all the very great simple truths of spirituality can be cynically deconstructed. But there's a point where complexity doesn't serve, and when you get through all the complexity, as many of us have done, you get to the simple truths. And sometimes they sound cliche because they are axiomatic and because they're true. And I would say that looking after what you've been given and looking after each other can't really be cynically dismissed.
How does your order balance its high ideals with the harsh realities of society and human life?
Oh goodness, in exactly the way I've described. The thing about life is that it will always be life. It will always throw curveballs at you. Curveballs to do with circumstances, to do with health, to do with finances, etc. Life is very, very, very hard. I think the least we can do for each other is stop making it harder. And as an Egyptian Mason, what I try to do is make sure that I'm not adding to the weight that many people already carry. And I certainly will not tolerate anyone adding any weight to myself, because I carry enough already. So that's kind of my philosophy. I think we all know how life can be. Some are privileged enough not to have many of the hard hits, but some of us have had many, many hard hits. And it isn't always obvious on the surface by how someone appears or what their demeanour is. And I think it's important to remember that what you won't learn willingly, life sometimes will force you to learn. And because I know that that's what life is like for many, many people, I think an order is there to provide a support and a layer of constancy that some people don't have from circumstances, family, friends, but also to provide principles and tools that can be really, really useful when you're up against it. And that's personal experience speaking. The tools I've received from the mysteries have been invaluable in saving my life, in giving me a way of living a better life, They haven't necessarily solved every problem, but they've certainly lessened the impact of many problems. And they've made me understand all of my problems a little better. So that's what I would advocate.
What are your order's views on the environment?
You may have all sorts of fantastical ideas of populating space, but when it comes down to it, this is all we have. If I was living in one room, I would look after that room and I would not fill it with rubbish. I would not break the walls down. I wouldn't push all of my furniture into one corner, and I wouldn't let it be flooded or ruined. You know, we share a globe. It's a lovely blue globe. It's vast and it's small at the same time. And I think that that means that we have to make sure we keep our house clean. And that starts really with how we see each other and how we see the environment up here. When that changes, everything else is possible. And the problem with battling it out in the political arena, although that's necessary, is that sometimes the first principles are not being understood. And for me, the first principle is, we live in one home, let's not mess it up.
What are your order's views on meritocracy?
I think it's very important in any institution, and I think the way that we're seeing the financial world struggling, the way people have been struggling because of bad decision making, we can see why meritocracy is so very crucial. We have a tendency to confuse privilege with merit, to confuse access with the right to access. And sometimes that isn't how it is. Not everybody who has the opportunity and the resources to be able to get into a position of making decisions that affect many, many people necessarily merit it morally or intellectually, because one has to have a clear grasp of consequences. And when people don't have that, it's essentially asking people who can only think from A to D to conceive the alphabet. And I can't see that ending up as anything other than disaster. So I would say that for our order, meritocracy is very important. Understanding merit can be very complex because people can merit things intellectually and not merit them morally. They can merit them morally but not have done the study. They can merit things because they have a really good heart, a true heart, but they may not have the wisdom to operate as a good person. It's not enough to be good if you're not wise. So when we understand that merit is as organic a thing to decide as anything else, we can have much better results, I think, when we are meritocratic. And essentially people are known by their works, as the Bible has said. Look at the fruits that somebody bears. Look at how they treat each other, how they treat themselves, how they treat the environment, how they use their resources, what they withhold, whether what they say and what they do tally, whether they are making an assumption that because they're good in one area, they must be brilliant in all others. I'm afraid that particular gamut has run its course, and we're all a little tired of it. So I think meritocracy is really important.
In the EMO UK Order Manifesto, you speak about your views on various things such as society, politics, the human soul, human potential, and so forth. Although these views are only briefly addressed, how does this tally with your statement about being a non-political and non-religious organisation? Politics
is a series of policies that one executes for the running of a country or the running of a people or a set of resources. Religion is a personal view on how the universe was created and how we should interact with that creator. These are all things that we believe as an order should be personally chosen. No one has the right to overrule the conscience of another. But because these are parts of people's lives and people's lives are important to us, it would be silly to create an order that has a mystical and spiritual purpose and not address those things, at least obliquely. So in the manifesto, what we want people to understand is how we as an order see those things without necessarily having a personal or slanted opinion on them. We try to see things from as universalist a standpoint as possible. And to some who have a particular vested interest in one thing or another, that might seem centrist. But even the term centrist is a political term. How can one differentiate between centrism and the golden mean, for instance, which all occult orders teach? You know, we have 2 pillars in the lodge, which I can reveal to you, but they are to be balanced. And I think that's an organic process too. It's a bit like juggling. Juggling works because everything is constantly in motion. So harmony is something that has to be constantly maintained. It's a very active state rather than a passive one. And I do believe that for our order, the mission statement that we've set forth in the manifesto, necessarily brief, is to give people an idea of exactly how we intend to go about helping that happen.
If a member's personal, religious and political views are not of concern to the order, how would you deal with a member whose views were fundamental or extremist?
Well, the issue there wouldn't really be about which particular religion or political viewpoint or social viewpoint the person held. It would be about whether or not their pursuit of that was harming the boundaries and the sensitivities of others, or putting other people in any kind of moral or physical danger. Again, as I said, people don't think about the consequences of what they're saying and doing on the people around them. And as an order, we're universalist. In one of our lodges, you could be sitting shoulder to shoulder with somebody who is a different gender to you, a different religion, a different political viewpoint. If you make your personal business, which of course is absolutely your personal business, something that affects how people view the order and whether or not they feel they would have a safe space in joining, I absolutely will not tolerate it, and neither will my senior officers. And it's quite obvious why. And I think for people who've made the decision to be extremist in that way, for any reason, they've made that decision absolutely independently in themselves, and they have to deal with the consequences of what that means. Not all company, therefore, will be for them. And it's implicit in being extremist that you don't want all company. So if you don't want all company, why would you be in a universalist order? It simply doesn't tally.
Is there ever a time when you believe a Mason of Egypt should sacrifice their neutrality and take definitive action?
I think when ordinary innocent people are in danger, I think when there is an attempt to sabotage or undermine the good works that are there to benefit other people, I think that's when an Egyptian Mason has to stand up and go, no, this far is too far. Anything that protects the moral and ethical integrity of the individual or of the collective is important to all Masons, and I think that's where an Egyptian Mason would have to stand up and be counted, as it were. This can be very complex, though. Some things that appear to be a breach of boundaries are simply about policing or are a change in perspective for people or a shift in the power base. This is why making things politically based isn't always the best way of understanding what they are morally and ethically, even though politics often calls itself an active participation in morals. We can see for ourselves that it doesn't always work out that way, because human beings are flawed and policies can be flawed because people are organic creatures and sometimes they don't run in straight lines or think in straight lines. So for an Egyptian Mason, really, it's knowing where the boundaries are that are important to you and your people, and I think also that would be important to all people. I'm not necessarily saying our Masons should wade into a fight and not know how to defend themselves, but of course there are members that we have who are military, who are trained in protecting people, and if they see that something's wrong, I know that they wouldn't let it be wrong anymore. And that's on all planes. If as a reader and counsellor, that's my background. If I saw that somebody was struggling with an issue and I knew I had the tools to help make that right or to protect their boundaries or give them the strength to protect their own, I wouldn't hesitate and never have done.
Is there a line which Egyptian Masons should never allow to be crossed, or one which they themselves should never cross?
I think that line is the same ultimately, and it would have to be truly ethical. I think people's boundaries are sacred. In Masonry, we take an oath never to allow harm to come to the member of any member of a family, of a brother or sister, and I think that can easily be extended to all of humanity. There are certain lines that you don't cross. You don't harm people unnecessarily. You don't intrude on people's privacy or their sacred spaces. You don't make people's lives unnecessarily harder. And I think that's the line that an Egyptian Mason certainly should not cross. And I think one where, for the reasons I've given earlier about ethics and standing up for them, they wouldn't permit someone else to cross in their company. And again, one has to read the situation. Sometimes people set circumstances up for themselves where they may play the victim, but actually they're as much a perpetrator passively in their condition as the person we might accuse of being the victimizer. And that's something that's very, very difficult to judge. But I think if you feel that there is a point where you have to say, thus far and no further, without falling into what I would say is the trap of extremism, then absolutely I think your moral prerogative is to do so, which is why people go on protests, why they write to their MPs, why they get very angry at the television. I mean, everybody's got a point where they feel that something just isn't right. And I think as long as you bear in mind that your perspective may be subjective and may not be correct, and that there are tools and measures for assessing that, then your heart's in the right place, and I think that you're at least aiming for being a moral person. And that's something we should all do, because there are plenty of people who aren't moral, and they do a great deal of damage.
As Grand Master, how strict are you on behaviour and boundaries?
Extremely. As some know. To create a safe space, people need to feel and be safe, and not just on the physical level. They have to feel and be safe emotionally, psychologically, and that isn't something that I'm willing to compromise. I know that things go wrong, mistakes are made, people are human. Sometimes people are like children. They get upset about things that they took a different perspective, they wouldn't think were so important. But I think when someone's willfully committed to causing trouble, willfully committed to undermining the harmony and structure of an order and the people who are benefiting from it, when they're willing to sabotage a person's access to that, I won't tolerate it. And I don't think there's any Grand Master on the face of this planet that would, because that's the point. It may not be for you, off you go. It might be for someone else. And good luck on your path, but don't waste people's time. And don't sabotage something that might be the answer to somebody's burning question, just because it wasn't your answer. I refer the Honourable Gentleman to what I previously said.
What do you see as your greatest ethical prerogative in serving the Order?
Harmony.
Thank you, Grand Master.